morning, everybody. Hi, the voice from above. It feels very booming right now. So today we are talking about I'm going to stand up because when I sit down in that, I don't think y'all can see but like the top of my head. I know. Today we're talking about understanding. How do we speak our truth in love when we come from many different perspectives? And I am so excited to have both Joel Chapman and Daniel Amsler joining me today for this conversation. We started off with naming. What is it over the past year and a half and in our lives that we need to name in order to bring them to the surface, to face them, and to process them, and to deal with them as a community and as individuals? We then moved into releasing, and Carter talked to us about what are those things that maybe we picked up during the last year and a half that we could let go of. We talked about canoeing over the mountains, and when you realize that there's not a large body of water to carry you down to the Pacific Ocean, you might need to release the canoe that you brought in order to get over that mountain. So what are those things that we want to release? And today we're going to talk about understanding. Because oftentimes, in order to release something, we first need to have that safe space and community to share our stories with one another, to share our perspectives, to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel understood, so that we can move forward in community and know what is informing each other's behaviors. So we have a little comic that's been going around, and it kind of hit right on what we're talking about. When we're looking at something, it's often very obvious to us what we are seeing, but it's a lot harder for us to step into the shoes of the person across from us and give them the space to talk about what they are seeing when it's radically different from what we're seeing. And so that's what we hope to begin to talk about today. Now, we would be fools to think that in 45 minutes to an hour we could solve all the problems of understanding going forward. But what we want to do is plant some seeds today. And if this is something that resonates with you or that gives you some thoughts or ideas or some energy, let us know, because we want to continue this conversation moving forward. So when I first called Daniel and Joel, I said, you know, we've got this idea for a forum, and here's the premise of it. In January, I got a flat tire right outside Panera in Laurelwood. And I had the nicest security guards come and help me change that to a spare so that I could drive it out to Wolf Chase Honda to get another one on there. While I'm driving down 240, I cannot go above 60 miles per hour. And so I had people zipping up to my bumper and then zooming around me, laying on their horn and making all sorts of funny gestures. And I thought, you know, if I could just put a big sign on top of my car that said, I am so sorry, I'm driving on a spare, that might help simmer the situation and help people know why it was that I was going 60 in the slow lane. I think there are a lot of moments like that right now. There are a whole lot of moments like that right now in our family dinner tables, in our workplaces, on the street, on the national level, on the global level, where there's something that's informing our behavior. And we want that opportunity to explain it to other people so that maybe we can be met with compassion and listening instead of frustration and anger. So, with that said, how about we start off by just telling a little bit about your backgrounds and why I said, Tag, you're it for today. And you've got that handheld mic that you can turn on.
Well, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Joel Chapman, and a little bit about me. If I were to be more comfortable this morning, I would ask you all to turn around and look over your because I sing in your choir loft. And now it's my choir loft too, because I joined this church back in April. And I'm so delighted to be a part of this family, and particularly to be here this morning and helping with this formation class. I'm a clinical psychologist in private practice here in the city for many years, and I came from First Congregational Church, where I founded the Pilgrim Center, a counseling program for the last 20 years, and so I'm now in a new chapter of my life, and so that's a little bit about me.
Judy and I are beginning in August our 12th year in Memphis, which seems amazing to me. We came from Southern California, and I was a pastor in Southern California for 15 years and a therapist for 25. And when we came here, Judy, of course, went to work, and I, of course, retired. I play a lot of golf, and I try to pay attention. I try to do some voluntary things around and in the church. But it's good to be involved. I'm always appreciative, and I'm invited to participate in what we're doing.
So first we are going to get started with Joel, because Joel is singing in our choir today and has to shoot out at 9:45 to go rehearse. So he's going to start us off with this Baby Blues cartoon. And if you can't see it quite clearly, the wife is saying, "That's weird." Father's saying, "What is?" And she says, "For the first time in forever, I don't feel guilty about anything." And he looks at her and says, "Really?" And then she says, "Oh wait, now I feel guilty about that." And he says, "And the world makes sense again." So.
That's a good jumping off point, because the husband says, "And now the world makes sense again." A lot of what we've been dealing with over the last 15 or so months is things being out of whack. You know, I get tired, and I'm sure you do, of hearing people take the phrase about normality and say, the new normal. What the heck is that, right? We're still working our way through that. And I loved Hester's story, her real life story about the flat tire and being on the expressway, because it really is a good illustration of, it's good, Dad. Maybe I went dead. It's really a good illustration of the topic that I'm going to start off with today, which is called moral distress. What's a body to do? She's got to get her tire fixed. Good Samaritans help get the spare on, but those are those donut tires, and you really can't drive. So what are you supposed to do? You got people getting mad at you and honking. It's distressing. And it sort of tugs at our sense of what's right. And so I've been dealing with that a lot, not only in my personal self, but with my clients over these past months. It's not so much about problems in living or issues that people may come to see me about. It's really more about dealing with life on a broader scale. And I came across this article that just set off a little ding in my head, and it's from the American Nurses Association, and they are the ones who coined the term moral distress. And here's how they define it. Moral distress is the emotional state that arises from a situation when a nurse feels that the ethically correct action to take is different from what he or she is tasked with doing. Ooh. Right? Anyone in the room by any chance in the nursing profession? Okay. Yeah, there we go. And of course, many of you are caregivers in various ways. And you probably immediately understand what this is about. You can't be in two places at once. And so you make a choice, you make a decision, and you do what you can in the moment to the best of your ability, right? We never know for sure, did we do exactly the right thing? And there's the moral distress. Okay? There's an old cartoon that I really enjoy and I've used for years. How many of us remember Ziggy? You know the cartoon Ziggy? A few of you do? Yeah, okay. When Ziggy was in the Sunday strip, it was a whole panels, and Ziggy is on the proverbial psychiatrist's couch. You know, he's always in therapy. And he's saying, you know, Doc, when I choose this, I feel guilty. When I choose that, I feel guilty. And you know what? Sometimes if I don't feel guilty, then I feel guilty about that. Kind of like the cartoon. And you'd think that was enough of a punchline, but no, it goes on. And the psychiatrist says to Ziggy, he says, you know, of course, you know, he's Viennese, right? He's like Dr. Freud. He says, Ziggy, the only way to never feel guilty about anything, never make a choice. And I really like that, because that's what we are. We are choice-making creatures. We can't help it. We're made that way. If we were any less than that, we would not be human beings. And there's the rub. We are human beings. At least most of us are, you know. There are some people who are outliers, who don't seem to fit into the human community, okay. But by and large, we are choice-making creatures. And that's what gives rise to this sense of, did I do the right thing? There was something I wanted to read about that. Yeah. Okay, so our readiness to feel guilt is a natural occurrence of being essentially moral beings. If we can't feel guilt, then we are something other. We're not, we may look like a human being, but there's a problem. So we are essentially moral beings. Humans who behave in shameless ways are also, we would call immoral, all right? We generally want to do the right thing, at least as we see it. And we typically want to do the right thing rightly. Rightly. It's not just do the right thing, we want to do it just so. Even perfectly. There's another buzzword that has made it more difficult to thread our way through the COVID era is, are we doing the right thing? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it exactly? What do you expect of me? And we can get into arguments like the looking at a 6 or a 9 on the screen, which is correct. You know, well, moral distress crops up because there is no one answer. There is no absolute at that moment. So, another part of being human and moral creatures is implied in what I've already said, and that is we seek connection. We are connecting creatures. We want to be involved with each other. Most of us do. So again, some no. But we are wired to seek connection. We belong to a group, a family, a club, a movement, a nation, and so forth. In fact, I would like to highlight, and this would be change the slide. Yes. I would just like to briefly highlight some neuroscience, which can sort of, it helps me, I hope it helps you, kind of be aware of why moral distress is what it is. For example, there's one hormone in our system called oxytocin. Maybe you've heard of it. It's getting to be a little more sort of in the public parley. But it is a hormone produced by the hypothalamus, which is sort of in the middle of the brain. And it is crucial in helping create and amplify the impulse to nurture and our need for trust. if it were disrupted or not present, people come off as rather cold and robotic. Isn't that something? There's actually a hormone that is very important to help connectability. That's one. The other is a system in our brains and our body called the mirror neuron system. People, and this is a quote, people feel each other's pain and joy to a much greater degree than other primates. Just seeing someone else smile activates some of the same neurons as when you smile. Like a mirroring, right? Any of you, how many of you have currently a grandchild that you adore? Yeah, boom, yeah, right? What is it we notice about a small child? Their smile, their seeking, when they've got to that age where they can focus, the eye contact, we really get off on it. They do too, right? That's the mirror neuron system, and these are actual neurological cells in groups all over the brain which fire. They light up. And is part of what helps us feel connected. So, the reason I'm highlighting this is that moral distress occurs when these systems are disrupted. And how have they been disrupted for these past 15, 16 months? Well, you can count the ways, right? Can't see my grandchildren, only on the phone or on Zoom. Ugh. I use Zoom a lot, and it's helped save a lot of headache, but ugh. Does anyone agree with me on that? That, you know, it's just a necessary evil. I'm glad it's there. I really am. I'm not an anti whatever. However, it is virtual. It is not this. You know, where we can make eye contact and we can do mirror neuroning kinds of things, right? It's not that. It may seem like it is. It's called virtual, but it's not exactly this. So it's why how many of you get off a day of Zooming and you just feel worn out? You know, and it's tedious, you know, and nobody's done anything wrong. It's just, and see, that can cause moral distress, can it? Because, oh, why am I feeling so worn out? These are nice people, you know, we did a good meeting, you know. Oh, I'm so glad it's over, you know. Moral distress. Am I doing the right thing? I have to watch the clock. I'm so sorry, but I do. So, the helplessness we can feel of not knowing how to relieve our moral distress. Am I doing the right thing? What is this? Or not even having a name for it. That's one reason I volunteered to speak on this topic, because it helps me, I hope it helps you, to have a name. Oh my gosh, it has a name. It's not just some weirdness that's going on. It's called moral distress. And that process can even set us up to have more suffering than the virus itself may cause. Some of us, our lives have not been too heavily touched by the virus's effect. We maybe haven't lost anyone physically, or maybe we've been able to negotiate our schedules to maintain a sense of normalcy. Yay. But many of us have not. It's really impacted our lives. And so it's easy for self-incrimination, if not some depression, to result, since we're often trained to think that we should have more control than is possible. All right? That's part of the whole moral distress thing, is because how many of us are raised to have a sense that we should be able to control this? You know, part of our American ethos, right, is, my gosh, we can fix that. We'll just press on, you know? So that gets in there too. We can become too hard on ourselves for not being able to do all we did pre-pandemic. I think that's important. And we may not be able to do everything we did the way we did it in this supposed post-pandemic era, we hope. You know, we don't know for sure. This helpless feeling can lead us to even be more irritable and impatient with ourselves and with others. And you know, we don't like to do that. We don't want to be fussy and grumpy and have other people feel uncomfortable around us. More moral distress, okay? We've read stories, maybe you have seen it, we've even heard of people getting into fights in grocery stores over whether or not you're wearing the mask, you know? And there was an awful event just the other day, a shooting. Somebody got into an argument at a checkout line and a guy pulled out a gun and shot the clerk. That goes beyond moral distress. So, to combat these possible types of self-reproach and to lessen the moral distress, we have to engage in activities that restore our sense of moral rightness, okay? Our moral dignity. How do I conduct myself and see myself with my loved ones during all of this? I quoted earlier in the information on the neurons, mirror neuron system, an author named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. He's a psychologist that has made mostly his career in discussing, in exploring the secular aspects of morality in society. What is this that makes us moral beings? What do psychologists have to offer about that? And he says that he's talking about happiness, okay? He says it comes from between, not just within. You know, often we can say that happiness comes from within. We've got to make ourselves happy. And he's saying we're missing the big picture here, that it comes from getting the right relationships between yourself and others, yourself and your work, and yourself and something larger than yourself. Right? So see, that's that connection factor, right? We're not just automatons, not in a relationship. We relate to each other, and we need connectability, and that sense of rightness is what helps promote our sense of happiness. So, then there's some actions that we can take on a personal level, no matter what's going on around us, that have to do with how we treat ourselves inwardly. So yes, we're connected. We pay attention in a moral sense of how we treat each other, respect for each other's opinions and attitudes. Yes. But how do we treat our own self? I made a passing reference to perfectionism a while ago. We could spend hours and hours and hours talking about the scourge of perfectionism, and I won't do that. But I will, let's see, yes, thank you. There are some final points I'd like to highlight from an author named Louise Hay. Louise Hay was a journalist, an activist, and later in her life, she came more and more to believe in the power of the mind to heal disease. So she's probably better known for that, or writing about helping people with chronic illnesses and how our mind can become more of a healer than a slayer. In fact, there's a very famous book called Mind as Healer, Mind as Slayer. The way we think about ourselves, the way we treat our bodies has a lot to do with our overall health. And I just wanted to emphasize several of the points that she makes about how we can treat ourselves more lovingly, more kindly. One of them is to stop unhelpful criticism. Now, she says, actually, she wrote, stop all criticism. I don't think that's accurate. We do need to be critical in a constructive manner. There are times when we should critique our choices and actions and make necessary changes to restore our sense of moral rightness, okay? But self-defeating criticism, being unkind to ourselves, being perfectionistic, saying, I should have already known what to do with this COVID thing. Why am I having trouble? Oh, no. Secondly, she points out that and this sort of follows from what I just said, to forgive ourselves. There is no such thing as perfection, but there is the possibility of wholeness, W-H-O-L-E-N-S. We can learn from past mistakes and move on. That is a different concept than saying we should be perfect. That sort of stops progress, because there is no really, there really is in psychological terms, maybe there is in liturgical terms, but in psychological terms, perfection doesn't exist. There does exist progress. We can make progress. We can improve. We can move toward a desired goal. The third one I emphasize is be gentle, kind, and patient. Treat yourself as you would someone you really love. So remember when we were children, one of the first axioms we learned was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yeah, still true. And the final one that she points out, I think could be controversial for some folks and in this day and time, is have fun. This incentive can be hard to invoke knowing that others are suffering. And it raises something that is called survivor guilt, which would be sort of a special category of today, my topic of moral distress. Survivor guilt. How dare I feel okay about my life and what's going on when my neighbor has just lost their 20-year-old son to COVID? How do we negotiate that? And if we destroy our own well-being as though somehow that is going to show respect for others who are suffering, then that means 2 lives are being destroyed. So this probably can be discussion material as I scoot out the door. So a final, while Louise's points can seem terribly selfish, if you take them in the context of the enemy we are up against, then radical happiness helps offset the corrosiveness of the COVID pandemic. Taking care of our emotional well-being is somewhat like the dictum on an airplane. In case of an emergency, you place the oxygen mask first on yourself and then on your child, right? We are still in an emergency like none other in recent history, and we must take special care of our personal well-being so that we can continue to live a morally righteous life. Getting the right relationships between yourself and others, yourself and your work, and yourself and something larger than yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joel. I will tell you, when I first called Joel to ask about this class, and we sat down for the first hour to talk through some ideas, I thought I probably should send him a check, because I feel like I just had a great session. So my hope is in sharing that with all of you. I just love it when we have so much expertise and experience in our own community to draw upon and to help us navigate the way forward. This has been going around. Some of you might have seen it in social media, but Jonathan sent this to us, I guess about 2 weeks ago. And you know, it's interesting because I think it's kind of like my story of the flat tire. What are those things that are informing our behavior that then when we hit that little bitty step and we break down, they say, I think you're overreacting. How do we get the opportunity to talk about all those things that maybe have us acting in that way? How can we share with those we love that burden that we're carrying so that then we can be more gentle with each other? We can be more aware and sensitive as we're moving forward. And with that, I'm going to turn to Daniel, and feel free for
two guys were talking, and one said, you know, it looks to me like you have a pretty good marriage. How do you do that? And the other fellow said, when we got married, we decided that when we felt a big fight brewing, that I would go out and take a walk. As a result, in the last 30 years, I've spent most of my life exercising out of doors. The pandemic has done things to us, inside and out. We need to appreciate that. We need to acknowledge that. We would do well to ponder this for ourselves and for our families, our little personal world, and the greater revealing world around us. For Judy and me, the pandemic has brought us closer together in contact with friends and family, which is kind of remarkable. We have 4 regular Zoom FaceTimes meetings every week with friends and family. 4 couples in California for an hour and a half on Wednesday night. A little scotch, a cigar, whatever, so it's... Our Friday night Zoom meeting is with cherished friends in California. Tom and I both love each other, but shall I say we differ on politics. Both our wives have mentioned, instructed, that when we get rolling on an energetic conversation, that we keep our hands below the screen. No finger pointing, no hand waving, gesticulating. Hester has put a very good question to us, to me and Joel and to the rest of us when we were thinking about this. How do we focus on conversations designed to increase understanding as opposed to changing another viewpoint to match our own? We want things to be back to normal. It is not going to happen. We have to deal with it. So simply put, what we are doing today is kind of raising a flag for understanding and know that we really need to pursue this. We've got stuff going on inside of us with our families, with our friends, with other people that we need to attend to and appreciate are building up or pushing us one way or another, and we need to deal with it. It may help us to remember the fight or flight syndrome. We all walk around with an automatic system about to go off when we are emotionally triggered. This is true in our families, with our spouses, with our children, with our friends. In this pandemic, crazy time, it would be wise to be aware of this fragile state in ourselves. Our family and our friends are not our enemy. We love them. It is a mistake to run from them or to try to annihilate them. Stop. Stay. Listen. Try to tell the truth plainly. Let the goal be understanding, not winning or avoiding. Years ago, psychologist Carl Rogers came up with what has been called client-centered therapy. It is a therapy that we sum up with the words like, what I hear you saying is simple, basic. But Rogers found out that when he did this, very often, pretty soon, a tear would form in the corner of the eye of the client when she was saying to herself, this person is really listening to me. Let spend a few minutes talking about good communication. It's all about things you already know. It may sound very Peter Rabbit, very basic, very simple. But we all have conversations that we need to have, or we have conversations that we need to avoid, or we are stumbling into conversations like hitting a landmine. So let's explore for just a moment where and how we might increase our understanding. First, jettison the idea that you can have a perfect conversation, especially if it's a troublesome one. Think about it, practice, perform. We think if I get this just exactly right, some good thing can happen. It's like you're going into Steven Spielberg's office and you've got 90 seconds to punch the best movie idea ever happened for him and for you to make millions of dollars, but you've got to get it utterly perfect. That's wrong. So when we talk to each other about difficult, painful, confusing, perplexing things, prepare less and speak more openly and honestly the more. Start with honest disclaimers. I feel like this is a conversation that I need to have with you, but I'm scared and nervous. I'm afraid of getting it wrong. I'm afraid of getting mad or sad. I may not have this right. I don't want to lose our friendship. I don't want to risk our love. May I still go ahead and try to talk to you, even though I'm feeling uncertain? These are the kind of open, revelatory things we say, need to say, and think about. Speaking out loud, being vulnerable enough to say this is what's going on, rather than trying to concoct over the last 3 days a perfect 5-minute conversation. Second, speak in I language and not accusatory you language. That is really hard to do. You have to go real slow, and you have to flounder around and not start doing this, and just to start saying, you know, I feel. It may be the most basic thing to say over and over again. Simply, I feel, and then say that. Talk for a long time. Talk haltingly. Not for a short time, explosively. And thirdly, ask the one you love, whom you're talking to please say back to you what you think they just heard you say. Basic stuff. Just a couple of things about what you do when you are on the receiving end as a listener. Well, listen. I mean, really listen. Don't go to think about what you're going to say when the other person stops talking or trying to figure out how you're reacting to it. If it's somebody we care about, we should be willing to say, my. Say things like when they're finished, give them time to falter in what they're saying. Let me see if I've got this straight. I think this is what you're saying to me. And then wait and let them tell you whether it's true or not, that you got it right, and go more. This takes a long time. Sometimes you need to say, wow, I didn't know that. Can we take some time to think and feel about that and come back to talk about it later? When can we do it? And how do you want to do it? After this long absence of usual adult forums due to the pandemic in our church, our Love Church community, we start with these themes in these return forums about communication and openness and admission So God give us the strength to vigorously look into ourselves for woundedness, for the effects of pressure, and the grace to speak kindly to ourselves and to each other about the hurts and the effects of COVID. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I really, really appreciate it. When I first came to Holy Communion, Daniel and Debbie Schott and maybe one other person were doing the premarital work with many of our couples, and it made me think about my own premarital work and the conversations and the way in which Andy and I still continue to struggle to communicate with one another with each new conflict that comes our way. And I feel like not only around our dinner tables, but as we gather back together from very different times away, this could be helpful for us as we figure out where each other is right now. I mean, you know, it's hard to know what each of us have gone through and what we're struggling with. So we've got a little while, so if anybody would like to offer something to the group, ask a question, feel free. We can bring the handheld mic to you. Or it's a small enough room if you have a big voice.
Dan, do you think that the last 4 and 5 years of our political and social life have been exacerbated by the polarization that we're exposing to the sort of tribalism we get into, where we're more likely to hearing only some people with whom we agree, and not even considering what to do with somebody who you disagree. It seems to me like we're all along that further along, and that's what is my opinion.
Phil's question was, do we feel like the increased polarization, where we're hearing more from the people, or choosing in our social media more from the people that think and feel the same way that we do? Is that correct?
Yeah, I do, Bill, and I think it's taken us a long time to put this terrible thing together. And I despair that we have the courage and the will to take it apart. It requires people to stop and think about it, and to admit that they want something that's simple and clear, and they don't want to listen to somebody else. They don't want to go to the effort of telling them what it is. And that's just deadly. So I think that what Hester has spoken about here, church and holy communion. Communion is this powerful, wonderful world. We ought to be able to do this in our church family. This is not easy work. But I think we have to acknowledge that it's there. And we have to really go slowly to see what we can do to adjust it, to take it apart, to administer it. The world doesn't have as much of it. Politics and the voting of things, consternation, tension. You can't start out by saying, I just want to know who you are so to know if you're the enemy or if you're on my side. That's what we do. That's shorthand. It's easy. And it saves a lot of hassle. But it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to face the conversation and work through the conversation. It's a lot easier to say, I don't have an enemy right now. I'm not going to go there. And speaking for myself, there were a lot of evenings in our when I felt like, gosh, I feel like a square peg in a round hole, and that I don't fit around this table right now because I'm coming at this from a very different place. And that's exhausting. It's hard. And it's hard to say instead of, well, why can't you just understand what I'm saying? To take that moment and say, look, I'm really feeling at odds right now with the people I love most. And here's why. And that's, those are those hard conversations.
I've heard on the golf course people say things like, all Republicans are Trumpsters. Democrats are baby killers. You want to talk to these people? I don't think so.
Yeah, the name calling and the finger pointing. I was telling Joel and Daniel on Friday when we were talking through this that there's one parishioner here, not here anymore, but when I first got here, would come up and go, Hester? Hester? And immediately every single body defense would go up, and she'll go, that was a great sermon. Oh, thank goodness. I don't know what you're about to say to me. But I think there are times when our body language can shut other people down. And it's important to have that open body language that's inviting and that helps other people to say their most vulnerable feelings with each other.
I bet I can talk loud enough that Jonathan won't have to walk all the way across the room. I am thinking about, and I think it was Emerging Christianity, Phyllis Tickle's book, and she talked about every 500 years that there is a transformation in Christianity. The Reformation, and just all kinds of, and she goes down and gives the chronology every 500 years. And perhaps our transformation began years ago with Gene Richardson becoming a bishop, being ordained as a gay person. And there was a major polarization bill at Holy Communion and throughout the Episcopal Church. And maybe that was just the beginning of a series of evolutions in thought and society. And the question becomes not which side of this evolution you are on, but as Daniel said, how do we communicate through it? How do we listen without being subjective to the person with whom we disagree? And it's very hard. We're working through in my family. My youngest sister has kind of extricated herself from the family because of politics. And she doesn't feel like most of us are pretty liberal. She doesn't feel comfortable expressing herself around us. And when I say liberal, I've got a sister who was on the board of the ACLU. That's how liberal some of us are. I'm not that liberal. But anyway, how do we listen? What do we do to learn the skill and create the habit of active listening? Dan, you may want to answer that. You may have the answer right there on the top of your head.
I think one of the things we do is not exactly on your point, Charles, but we have to have, as Christian people who believe in love and truthfulness, to work hard at truth. One of the most frightening things in the world is that many people believe there's no such thing. There's no truth, there's no reality, there's nothing. Everything is whatever you, the notion that everybody is lying about everything, so let's just get
the Trinity, or about race relations, or about gender identity, or about any of the many things, transfiguration, I mean, anything that you want to discuss, no matter where we feel on that, we come around one table. And we all come together, and we worship one God. And we're okay that the person next to us believes differently than we do. So how do we take that sacrament and live into that sacrament in our conversations and our relationships with one another?
Pastor, we attended 5:30 service last Sunday, the first time really since the pandemic. And the act of the service and the communion was in itself an expression of exactly what we were talking about. Everybody differently came to the communion, and no one checked the credentials or asked who you, what party you with. It just the fact that it was occurring and people were there and enjoying it, to me, is what the church's great commission is. And you didn't have to have a sermon to say that, or somebody preaching forgiveness or acceptance. If people were happy to be there, of every stripe, if you haven't been 5:30 in a while, it really wonderful experience. We both got there, so energized. So what I say is the church is doing your action.
Yeah.
Rather than preaching it. Sorry.
Yeah, so often it's those outward and visible signs that can help really embody a theological point. Last week was unique in that Clark and Bryant really brought together people from all over the city, and it showed in that congregation. We had people from all over the place, people who had been taking communion, people who came forward for blessings, people who had never been in our church before. The next 2 weeks, we're going to have a wonderful, 2 sets of wonderful guitarists. So if you're into some good old Protestant hymns and folk music, that's going to be really unique and special. But it's important for us to remember that, Holy Communion we're not a club. We're here to be the church, not to go to the church. We're here to continually expand that reach and expand that circle so that we're always making it comfortable for those who maybe are unlike us to come in and enter these conversations and enter these relationships, because we grow every time we do. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. I hope we can continue. If this is something that has resonated, let us know, and we will